Bryn Gladding is a commercial photographer who invests time, energy, and his heart into pursuing his own personal projects as well. I'm going to share with you something he wrote to me after our conversation together. As with you, I'm trying not to allow my skepticism about my work life and AI in the only career I've ever known define me anymore. I want to grow, love, share all that is in my heart in art. Here's my conversation with Bryn. I'm going to welcome you, Bryn, on the day of your birthday to speak with me, which I think is such a pleasure for me. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I look forward to speaking with you on vulnerability in life.
Thank you. Thank you, Bryn. And so we'll just jump right in. I'm going to ask you, what got you started taking photographs?
I grew up in a newspaper family. My parents bought a newspaper in 1964. It was just kind of normal for me to be around my parents and going to events and enjoying watching them interact with people. I never really appreciated it until I started taking pictures myself. But growing up in that world, it was a weekly newspaper, small, community-based, and every night they were running out to take a photograph of another team or another event or something. And it was always fun because I think my interactions with people were always with older people growing up. So I had a real affinity for meeting and learning about others and getting their stories and hearing about what was going on. And I think that's part of the newspaper industry in general is, you're always trying to find something about someone that is a positive. I actually was a hockey player, I guess, if we can call it that. And I got a scholarship to the US, and my dad wanted me to be a printer. So I went down to view the printing school, and that actually did not go well. So fortunately for me, I think the tour guide said, well, what about photography? Since it's a newspaper industry, maybe you'd like to see the photography. And we went up into the photography studios, and that was the end. I just said, yeah, this is where I would like to be. And I think that came from having a passion for art, and from a little kid laying in front of the TV at home with my brother and, drawing hockey players and designing hockey shirts, and everything was hockey, hockey, hockey. I never really found photography until my later years when I went to school for it.
So tell me a bit more about that. So when you started taking photographs and the kind of photography that you're doing today.
I think coming back to the newspaper end of it, I think I've always been intrigued by telling stories. So when I went to university in Rochester, it was just learning the basics of photography at that time. I didn't do it through high school like most kids do. They do the yearbooks and things like that. But I always had that creative force inside of me that needed to try to find a way to express myself through my photographs, and whether that was through the expression of photographing people. But at the time in school, I wanted to be a commercial photographer. I found that making photographs was more enjoyable than taking photographs. So the process of actually finding props and finding often people as well, I think it helped me fulfill my desire to try and express myself through those stories. And I just like creating. It's never been about anything more than that.
So tell me more specifically about some of the photography projects that you're engaged in today, or let's say over the last few years, that really is something that you're passionate about.
Through my photography, I've always tried to keep projects going on the side. I've started on a new project with Walter Allward, who's a sculptor. I absolutely love his sculptures. I think they're some of the most emotional, passionate pieces, oftentimes honoring war heroes, or he did the Vimy Ridge Monument. Incredibly thoughtful and beautifully done sculptures. So, I've been starting to document that and trying to find what he saw in those actual figures that he uses in his sculptures. I think that they're beautiful, and how can I re-engineer animate those in my photographs to tell the story that he was trying to tell. It's enjoyable to see them in person and experience how he would have felt actually making them. I've connected with an artist over the last few years who's been a friend and mentor to me, and she's a beautiful sculptor. So I quite am intrigued by what she knows and how she's taught me about sculpture. And I started doing some sculpture on the side as well for my own sake. And, it's finding yourself within the people and the work that you're doing. I find that my creative inspiration comes from actually doing things that I don't do every day. And that leads into new ideas and new opportunities. I think that's been the thing that really makes me enjoy the creative process.
So when I was about to ask you this question, I'm not expecting there to have to be an answer to it. It's just where my head goes, because I start to relate to some of what you're sharing around. You have your day job expectations and then the projects you do on the side. And even that extends maybe more broadly sometimes into sculpture or other forms of art or work of some kind. How do you balance your effort and your attention and energy across those different initiatives? And do you feel like they need to all on some level align, or do you feel like you need to connect the dots among those things? Or can you just say to yourself, this is exciting, I'm going to kind of pursue this, and it doesn't really matter how it supports or connects into what I might be doing over on this side of the fence?
Yeah, I think they do have to connect. I think as I get older, the one thing that I really want to do is not work so diligently on the things that don't mean anything to me. So I try to incorporate what I do in my day job to all of those projects as well. And I think that began even when I started in photography. So I started my business in 1991. I was doing a lot of cheese photography for a cheese company. And I remember always being ahead of the curve, because coming out of a creative arts school, you were ahead of what was going on in the industry because you were doing all the testing. And, I did all the beta testing for Adobe and, did work with digital cameras before they were really a thing. And coming out of school, I had that creative inspiration. And so every time I got a job, it was, how can I make this better than what they expect? And I did that for, I would say, a majority of my career. And maybe I still do. I try to take it one step beyond what they expect. And I remember one of my first jobs with the cheese company was I created a 20 by 30 print of a background with condiments and all kinds of things from what you would eat on a charcuterie board. And then I did that in pastels. So I made a print of something I photographed and then did pastels over top of it to make it look like an art piece, and then put the real cheese on top and photographed it with the cheese on top of the piece of art. So I was always creating something that was appealing in a different way. And it was probably done before. Someone, I'm sure, did it before I did it, but trying to find my way into that niche. And that was part of my art photography beginning. And I think that has worked well for me over the years. And so now I find myself struggling a little bit because we don't have that opportunity to be that creative in this world of digital. Like, you can be more creative, but also you're restrained a little bit because of how you can do things, just because of financial constraints on companies and things that way. So they tend to pull back a little bit on where they'll let you go with doing the work for them. They're very specific.
What I was just thinking was, where in the past, because you have this experience too, so people who come new to digital photography, it might not apply to them, but for someone like you who has experience in the darkroom and that magic of not knowing necessarily what you captured in the moment because it doesn't appear until later. Is it a little bit of a constraint in a way now that you always see what you're going to have in the moment while you're doing it with digital photography, and that magic moment isn't there so much?
I think that that's where this resurgence of going back to analog photography has come from. I think people are actually really excited about shooting film again and having the opportunity to experience the magic of sending your film off to the lab and getting it back and having to actually load film and get an exact exposure. It's just another tool, honestly. And I don't miss doing analog photography at all. I mean, I miss certain parts of going in the darkroom, but you can also find that within digital printing and alternative printing. And I've always been, with my connections with artists, I do a lot of copy work for art companies and artists themselves. And it's all about the process. I find that far more intriguing than the actual final piece. So, that gets me excited to see what they've done and maybe how they've done it and to appreciate that part of their work. What you're using does not really matter, and people think they have to have the best camera in the world, but that really doesn't make the image any better. It can be sometimes the worst cameras that make the most beautiful images.
I saw a video of a small boy, and I'm sure lots of people have seen this, and he's surfing on a 4x8, maybe. It's like a plank.
Yeah.
And everybody else out there in the ocean with these fancy boards and all the things and all the equipment and everything. He's wearing a pair of shorts and he's on a 4x8 and he looks fantastic. And so You don't need a fancy board. You don't need a fancy camera. It's sort of your vision of what you want to create. And I'm 100% with you on the whole process thing. And I have to watch myself on these conversations because I always want to ask how did you make that? And what do you do? And particularly if it's like hands-on things like, how did you create the resin to make the thing I find that fascinating, but I have to sort of curb my natural tendencies to go because it's not for everybody, but I think I agree with you. Fascinating.
Yeah. I that's what I find intriguing. Like it's a really interesting time. And I think that, we haven't really delved into AI at all yet, but I had a bit of a revelation this morning about AI, and I'm thinking, all of the people who have never had the opportunity to have an imagination, like they're very analytical, are now having the opportunity to be creative because of AI. They can punch into their phones and have something come up and they feel like they've created something new. And really, all they're doing is taking, other people's ideas and images and AI is putting that together for them. But it's also from there taking the creative person and giving them an opportunity to actually learn about how to speak to the analytical people. So as much as I can look at it as a negative, I'm trying on a personal level to find a way to merge into that without losing my own creative process. And that's where the challenge is, I feel, right now. I think that we're in such a new world of creativity that it really hasn't exposed itself yet. And within the next few years, I think we're going to see a real resurgence of, like with film, analog film over digital. I think we're going to see a resurgence to people doing painting and art and maybe actually getting recognition for it. I think that there may become more respect for an artist because the people that have never had that idea of art as a heartfelt thing for them to be a part of, I think they always kind of push artists away. And yet when they go on holidays, where do they go? They go to see art. They go to listen to music. They go to the galleries. They go to the museums. But on their day-to-day, that's irrelevant to them. So I think maybe we'll find that maybe there'll be a synchronicity between the two happen more as we merge further into the AI world, and hopefully artists may become more respected that way. I hope.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can. I'm not far enough along in thinking about how I feel about this because I have some immediate gut reactions just because, and it's new, right? So I'm going to resist because it's new. I'm going to resist because I feel like it represents some things I don't approve of. And the way AI has been trained up to this point, I think is not cool, of just eating up all the stuff that's out there without the rights to do it. So there's that part of it. I have heard other people talk about it. And I think that would be great. I agree with you. It would be great if there was a resurgence in enjoyment of and appreciation of the hands-on piece of creating arts and crafts, or however you want to distinguish those things, but the handmade aspects of things and the individual, because as soon as it's handmade, you have individual pieces. You don't have an infinite number of perfect digital copies of something anymore. So that I like that. If we can also appreciate that as much as we might appreciate some of the AI created stuff. And I think also what you were saying is there's a democratization of, and I've seen that in other fields too, where maybe somebody has a podcast and maybe they have great presence and they have great voice and they connect really well with their guests, but they rely on a script that was written by AI because they're not great script writers, because they're not, but should that hold them back from all the other gifts that they have in terms of being a podcaster? And, my knee-jerk reaction originally was like, yeah, it should. But that's not fair, right? That's not fair. So where AI levels the playing field a bit in different ways, that's sort of interesting. Where AI makes certain things such low-hanging fruit that we can turn around and do other things that are a lot more complex and human-ish and unique and individual and handmade. That is definitely a benefit, but it is a complex question. So thank you for bringing it up. And I think I feel like I'm not in a good place to,
No,
to ask a good question after that.
I have those knee-jerk reactions as well. And honestly, through listening to some of your podcasts, it makes me rethink and say, okay, what can we be grateful for? What can we take from this that is a learning tool? I think that we always need to view it from the opportunity to learn something new. That's what we have to go through to become better people, to become better humans, to accept things that we can't control. And by being open to those types of new opportunities, I think that maybe I don't really want to be a part of it, but I also don't want to be left behind. I would love to stay relevant to what's happening. I want to know what's happening. And it's a little bit like raising kids. You don't necessarily want to allow them onto Instagram or Facebook or wherever they want to go, Snapchat and those places, but you have to know what it's about in order to allow them to do it so that you can feel like you can at least regulate it in a way. And that's really the way that this new world is. I think that we at least have to appreciate what it is, know that it's not going away, and how can we work within the boundaries of what it's doing. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I don't necessarily like that AI is taking, let's say, billions of images over decades of photography. How does it pay back those artists who have created those images to begin with? Or music, it crosses so many different levels. Literature, where does that go?
Okay, so I agree with you, and I'm going to move us into a conversation that in a way is related in as far as the emotional aspects of creating art which is not a factor in AI as far as AI producing art. It's purely mechanical process. But as far as human beings creating art, I want to move us back to you and ask you where you see vulnerability in your own practice as an artist.
I think I've always found vulnerability in connecting with people. I really love the process of getting to know someone and finding a way into their world. And sometimes it means giving up something about yourself in order to get that out of them, especially in the photography industry. When you photograph someone, people sometimes think, oh, well, this is just taking too much time to get to know who they are. But that's the process. You want them to be real. You want them to be themselves. And in order to capture them in an image, you really have to give them the opportunity to open up. And if they don't open up to you, you will never capture who they really are, truly are. So whether it's my business or not, I will ask them about family. I will ask them about their passions. I'll ask them about their holidays, things that mean something to them, something that takes them away from the office, something that takes them away from the place where we're just trying to capture the basics. And I want to tell that story. So that story for me is the most important part of that. So I think vulnerability is getting to them in an emotional way. So for myself, it's about connectedness. It's about caring. It's about being compassionate to maybe who they are. I find that when it comes back to myself, I try to veer it back to them. So it's, I guess I've never allowed myself to be vulnerable in that way, which I'm not sure where that leads to your question, because I find I distract the question a lot and move it to another place because it's my way of dealing with it. And through some of the work I've been working on, I've got other personal projects that I'm working on as well. And I feel like I'm not ready to give those up yet. They're personal and I feel I would be very vulnerable to whether that's feedback or people judging that, but that really doesn't even matter. It has nothing to do with the creative process. And that's been my challenge, is to get over the fact that I need to allow that process to maybe come to light and people will get to know me maybe better that way.
When it comes to maybe sharing some of your own personal work, I'm just going to pry a tiny bit. So that more personal work, does it involve other people in that interaction, or is it just, it's work you've just created by yourself? Okay. So you don't have the.
Yeah. I think that I never thought about having personal work over the years. It's always been about my clients. It's always been about creating for other people. And when COVID hit, that's really been the transition. I realized that I'm the only person that looks after me, and I'm fortunate to have a great family, my wife and my kids, and be surrounded by love that way. But to express myself through my photography has been a whole different world. And I think that COVID made me realize that all of the people that I've done work for over the years aren't really there for me. They had a purpose and a need that I fulfilled. And I felt I was very good at fulfilling that for them, which is why I've made it, now almost 35, 36 years. But when COVID hit, no one ever really reached out and said, hey, are you okay? Is your family good? And I felt myself calling people to make sure everyone was on the good side of it. And I only had a few people that were ever reciprocal of that. So, when I asked for help, maybe when things weren't great through COVID, I didn't feel like people were there for my family. Or so it was an unusual time, and that kind of made me introspective and look at who I was, and it brought on some new work, which, one day maybe I'll share. And I'm looking, I feel like it needs to be shared. And I think that on an emotional level, it will begin to help me grow and just try to connect me more with my art and with that side of my passion for creativity. I think I need to express that emotional side of it. I found that being curious about others has been very good for me. Trying to understand who they are, trying to capture them in a higher state of who they are has been a very enjoyable process. But now I'm feeling, as I get older, it's always, now I need to look at number one, I guess, and feel like, what can I accomplish? What can I do to just be the person I want to be? We're all here on this planet for a short time, and how we connect with each other can be an opportunity lost if we don't do it. And I've got a little story for that, because my brother sold his newspaper business in 2018. And at that time, all of the equipment and all of the pieces of the business went to the new owners. And then the new owners, when my brother sold the building, got sent to an antique dealer that bought everything up. And a friend of mine went on a little excursion. He was into letterpress printing and things like that. So I told him where I thought the items showed up. He went and he bought a bunch of items from the antique dealer. And what happened was he came back, and I got a phone call that night, and he says, I have something that you might be interested in. So he had bought a couple of things for me. So the next time I saw him, he gives me a book, and it's an old printing press book, just about process and how to set up a Heidelberg printer. And he gives it to me, and I start paging through the book. And what did I find in the book was a piece of paper folded in half, and my dad's signature was on the bottom of the page, and it's an ink handprint on the page. And I'd never seen this picture ever before. My dad had passed away in 2012, and finding this piece of him in a book I think that was my transition into looking internally at my work and, what I'm doing. Because I thought, to think I never saw him in that way growing up. You don't think about the size of someone's hands, or, now we have video for who people are, but we don't actually have that physical connection with who they are. So what is it, and how can we connect with them in a different way that feels relevant and important to us? And that just kind of set me off in a place where I think when I'm gone one day, I want people to remember me for who I am, not for who they thought I was.
To learn more about Bryn's work, check out his Instagram account at Bryn Gladding, as well as his website, bryngladdingphotography.com.